We have a really exciting show today because Rob always brings the fun and an incredibly talented, versatile artist and a real energizer every time he comes to our gallery. Rob was one of our first artists that we ever had in the gallery, and he's brought a lot of energy each time he's come. So I'm very grateful not only for all of you being here, my team, and Rob. Um, I do want to make an announcement that we are going to be opening. We haven't been slacking much. We're going to be opening a show at Marie Selby Gardens in Sarasota. So if some of you are near the Sarasota area, you might want to go see the beautiful gardens and see some beautiful glass. But today, I'm really excited to have you here, Rob. And Mary, thank you for pulling all this together and run away with it.
Thank you, Duncan. And thanks to Rob for being here and all of you for joining us. Again, as Duncan said, the gallery is a group effort. Irene Mclellan, Danielle Bauer, Lauren Hill, Dan Alexander, all of us worked together really hard to bring this to you and to keep the gallery open and available to show wonderful work in any way that we can. So we appreciate your being part of what we're doing. So today we're hosting Rob Stern. As Duncan said, amazing friend of the gallery. Energy is his middle name. Rob is known as kind of a mover and shaker among artists and the glass community. We're going to introduce Rob. Rob is in Miami right now. He's just come back from a series of installation projects, and we're happy to have him here. So Rob, tell us a little bit about your sense of community in the glass world and what that means to you and how you integrate your work into your love of community and socialization.
Sure. First of all, thank you guys for having me. It's always great to join you at any point, anywhere. I got pretty lucky to get on board the small studio glass movement in the late 80s when there was a group of people coming out of the 60s who had gone across the country and started collegiate programs and started interfacing with European glass communities and were influenced on the equipment and some of the techniques. So having a little more than a 30-year run, it's been jam-packed with all kinds of amazing characters who've been incredibly influential. And it's really kind of a small world in a way when you're connected to the various schools and through the galleries, and of course, an amazing group of artists who are participating in that. So, from the very beginning, I was extremely lucky to go visit the Pilchuck Glass School, which is sort of the epicenter in the world for artists to gather and work together and exchange ideas. And having come out of a performing background prior, I was quick to jump into the mix, as it were, and befriend some sort of very important masters from various countries and beg them for the opportunity to go abroad and work in the factories and learn the old world techniques. There was a huge turn in the knowledge here in the States at that time. It came kind of out of a ceramics mentality initially, and then with the sort of meetings and mixings of these European masters, the level of proficiency quickly shot up through attending these schools in the summertime and mixing in with really age-old masters.
So how did you then take that and decide to open your own studio in Wynwood?
Yeah, so I actually was overseas working in the factories of Peter Novotny, who was my sort of great friend and master. And at one point, I came back to the States, uh, oddly, to visit my grandparents here in Miami, because I'd been traipsing around and gone for quite some time. And my grandparents were both involved with the University of Miami, and they lived next door. And a friend of mine, Martin Blank, who's another important glass artist, had told me just prior to my return that he had been to the University of Miami and done a glass workshop, and I had no idea that they had glass, and they actually had a small glass program that was under the guise of ceramics. So I quickly jumped on my grandfather's bike and took off around the block and found the glass shop, and immediately ran into the folks who were involved with it, and we hit it off, and there happened to be kind of an opening position as a lecturer, and I came right in, and we started developing the program with the help of Myrna and Sheldon Paley. We grew the program pretty quickly, and and it sort of was a hot time in Miami with design. And in the early 90s, the Wynwood Arts District was really starting to come about, and I took a studio down there straight away when it was affordable. And built my first glass studio as kind of a complement to the school facility, because I found that the types of projects that I was getting involved with could not be facilitated in the school setting. So I expanded my capabilities by creating my own studio, which we've had for close to more than 20 years down in Wynwood. So it's been an exciting time down here.
How do you think the glass art scene has changed in Miami over the
Well, I can first start by saying we are at the edge, at the farthest point away from the real mecca of glass, which is Seattle. So it's been a sort of a long distance relationship with the mainstream community. However, like I said, with the help of some collectors and the habitat galleries, we were able to bring attention to the school. And actually, I was sort of brought into this by William Carlson, who is another important glass artist. He came down, and we worked together to build the University of Miami glass program up. And we brought many important glass artists, largely people that I had either met in Europe or at Pilchuck or Penland, other schools, down here to broaden the scope of glass, creation and enthusiasm amongst collectors. So we had a really nice buzz going for many years at the university.
Thanks. We're going to actually now go into your studio. We're going to walk through a little bit of Wynwood and see a little bit of the vibe there, and then enter your studio.
Okay, tell you a little bit about where we're located. It's just slightly north of downtown, and it is right on the Biscayne Bay sort of corridor. So a lot of art galleries and things of that nature. But one of the things that Wynwood's highly noted for is the graffiti, which is world class. There's my building here. But in and around the area where my studios are, hundreds, if not thousands, of large walls, and which are done by groups of people that come in during Art Basel. And so it's a very lively area with a lot of artists mingling and meeting one another and counter influencing from the paint into other mediums. So it's been a really great place to have the gallery. It's right in the heart of Wynwood. So here we enter into, I have a gallery in the middle or front of my studio, which houses a lot of different works that have been created. Much of this work is, I would say, over the last 10 years. And as you can see, it's an extremely wide variety of objects created from glass and other materials. So I work with metal and light and wood to largely support a lot of the glass pieces, and we like to use it to experiment. Like for instance, here with the bamboo, these are constructed projects which have metal infrastructures to gain scale.
Can those be used outside as well? Are these?
We have made them outside, and we've also made them with light inside of them. So yeah, this specific model is an interior for an interior design. But you know what you'll see is just a really eclectic approach to the material. I tend to try and evoke some movement. That's largely the common denominator. When we're blowing glass, it's done on an axis, much like you would spin clay on a wheel. So many times the stuff tends to be symmetrical, and I tend to try to work outside of that symmetry as much as possible. So here we enter into the hot shop, and we're currently under repair because we're shut down, and my people who work with me are not attending right now the shop. But so things are a little in disarray, but it's a rather small shop, intimate, but ample for what we like to try to do. You know, it should be noted that a lot of my work is also done in other facilities around the nation and world. This is one of the signature series, which I've been creating for the last, I would say, about 7 years. The Wind Stars was sort of a nice formula for creating pieces from molds and putting them together. But I use a lot of adhesives in my work to gain scale, and some natural found objects, in this case, palm fronds from my yard, so has a touch of Florida. You know, look, my fascination with nature is sort of the common denominator in much of the work. I have various anecdotes that I could tell about raking leaves or watching trees or being in the forest, but paying attention to details in nature has always gathered my attention. And then there's sort of the combination of returning to the glass and figuring out how to distill those ideas through the material. And so it all really boils down to the glass and what we can do with it. But I like to try to reflect on my experiences out in nature, and in large part, it is a kind of a combination between nature and architecture, because I live in a pretty prominent architectural city. So there's a sort of a nice combination between nature and human nature. As you can see here also, the geometric birds or geometric forms are constantly referring to architecture and structure. But then I like the idea that we can then take that back to more of a liquid form. Here you see leaves that are built into vessels or forms standing together, which all somehow relate to things that I see in nature, and then are translated through the glass. Of course, crystals, a nice form, and palm trees and things. But I tend to be really loose and free in the way that I approach the material. So with architectural projects and lighting projects like these, I try to find a point of inspiration that has to do with maybe the site where the piece is going, and I'll roll that into the concept of what we're making so that it has some contextual reference.
Well, as you say, your combination of natural forms and architecture are really impressive, and I know that you do a lot of installation work for architectural projects. So it's a beautiful combination.
Yeah, it's a happy place. You know, where because look, the way I see it is that we're kind of there's a symbiotic relationship in most cases that we have with nature, but there's always the case that we're going against the forces We can certainly see that now, clearer than ever with some of the stuff that's going on, is that we're really sort of playing a small part in the bigger picture. And so I try to use my art to describe that displacement, or sometimes harmonic convergence, that we as humans have in this day and age. So here we move into sort of the guts of the back of the shop, and you can see a lot of projects laid out where we will address their construction process. I work in this way where we have a lot of things laying around, and I'll sort of puzzle it together. And so really it sits for a while, and we work on a lot of different things at once. In the rear of the facility, we have the cold shop, which is a machine shop where we can work on the glass after it's come out of the cooling process. You can cut it and grind it. And much of my work is fabricated together. I've always had a knack for building things and looking for scale. Glass is a difficult material to accomplish large scale in the blowing process. So it's been quite a challenge. And of course, you can see it's quite a hodgepodge of activity going on in there. But at the end, it comes out and goes, into the galleries and or commissioned spaces, which inevitably always looks much better than when it's in the back of the studio. But it's sort of like orderly chaos in and around there. And again, I got to reiterate that we're in sort of a shutdown period, so things have sort of stacked up, but things move around a lot. And I work at a pretty progressive clip, very prolific style, working on a lot of different things at one time.
You have an awful lot of work there. And so do you stop and run from one part of the project to the next part of the project? Or do you try to finish
Yes,
one?
I do. I do. I mean, really what it is, Mary, is I have like 20 different projects going on at one time. And so we never really finish one and then go on to another one. We push all 20 along at the same time. And so then 10 come out at the end of several months, So it's a different kind of way of working for most. As some people tend to need to focus on things. I tend to try to have a lot of things going on at once. And during that time, a lot of things can happen because things are sitting. And so there's time for me to sort of change my mind or make improvisational decisions. And frankly, I'm a bit of a musician, so I kind of approach the glassmaking in a musical way where we sort of have musical notes that are laying around, and I'll build a song out of them as we go. And sometimes it's a flop, sometimes it's a surprise. Inevitably, we're learning things, and I think that's what I'm interested in most.
That's beautifully put. These pieces that we're seeing now, Danielle, can you go back a few pieces? Because I believe they're part of an exhibit, aren't they?
Right. So here I've included most recent exhibit. It's in Biot, France, was last September. And I showed a picture there of a grouping of folks that we got together. And I took some of my assistants over. I did a residency for a couple of weeks and actually created a whole body of work, which is now on display. It just opened yesterday for the big Glass Festival, which is in Biot, France. It's an annual festival, and I was supposed to be there featured as a demonstrating artist. I found out moments ago that one of my wind stars, actually one that you see there, is on the front of the magazine for the festival. So that's really a nice, and on the posters. So that's a nice surprise and accolade there. But this was an amazing show because I was able to create a lot of the different types of work in one show. And this was all done within 2 weeks on site with a tremendous team, I might add. So some of the pieces like these are put together hot. And some of the pieces, and I mean, they're done pretty much start to finish. And then pieces like this require cold working and building after the fact. And we had quite a bit of success with that show. And now some of those pieces are going off to a couple of museums, as it seems, for a couple of other shows. So that's quite nice. So here, go ahead.
This is
I'm
all
just saying,
the museum show that we just saw?
so this is part of a larger architectural installation that I've been doing some of these recently. And, you know, it's pieces like this that are sort of site specific. You know, as I said, I'll try to emulate either the surroundings or perhaps what activities occur in the building or site, so that there's a underlying current or a connection between what the building stands for and what the art sort of emulates in the space. And of course, I'm using a lot of light. This is probably a byproduct of the old neon days in Miami, but here we're using LEDs so that you can alter the colors of pieces or not have them on at all. So it's a nice sort of new frontier in the work. And these are stools for sitting, furniture. This is a recent commission for a private home in West Palm, and you can see the stools and then the wall installation all up top. So these are the types of projects that we're constantly working on, and architects and designers are coming to me and looking to fill spaces. Of course, a lot of the stuff that I do is sea related, being a diver and a surfer and a sailor. We're moving into now a museum in Dania Beach, Florida. The Moda Museum had just made a really large acquisition of my work this year. So we've been facilitating the installation of all those works into this museum. And it's a large collection of Chihuly and some of my other forefathers and contemporaries' work. So it's quite a nice you know, inclusion into a beautiful collection of work. This is a constellation of the Windstar pieces. You can see some of the Chihuly's flanking and old William Morris's, and the collector who acquired all these pieces came to my studio and looked into the archives, as it were, and was taken back by a lot of the experimentation that we had done, and wanted to commission me to do some other pieces like the coral reef, and which we've now included in the collection, and some of these newer perch bird pieces that I'm doing. I also make paintings. These are about 25 years of doing these kind of action paintings with glass. Pyrography is a burning technique on wood. So I'm showing you just a number of the pieces, but these have become pretty instrumental in a lot of facilitating architectural spaces over the years, and interior spaces. Printing with glass, hot glass. So in the end here, I just want to show a few pictures of some of the classes that I've done. This is in Minnesota this January, which was interesting. And there's in Turkey a class. And, you know, it always comes back down to the sort of group activities that we get involved in, because glass inevitably requires a team to make things.
Well, that's a wonderful tour, Rob. And we have a few questions. Christine asks, how many people are working on your team per department? I mean, you have so many different aspects of what you're doing in that studio.
Well, I kind of wish that they were there working so you could see. But I've got a couple of people who work with me more or less full time. And then I bring different people in for different things. But we could have up to 10, as Duncan pointed out. And you'll see this in the next clip, we did a demonstration for the gas conference last year in St. Pete, and we had up to 22 people working on a large piece. And, we don't always work together all the time, but what's fabulous about the glass industry and really the community and club, if you will, is that it's a kind of a language that we all speak, and you can really put together a group of the people on the spot. People sort of know what to do, and it's, and that part of it is such a fascinating, you know, therapeutic way of working with the material, because you're sharing all of these actions and ideas with people, and it's getting the young people of tomorrow excited about what the possibilities.
So you mentioned music also, and Joni asked what you play. And I think that actually playing together is very related to working together in a hot glass studio.
It really is. Unfortunately, Pilchuck didn't happen this summer. I've been at Pilchuck for 30 summers, and we play a lot of music. We get together, and when we're not, we make a lot of instruments from glass, actually. And I've done a full orchestra of glass up there before. But actually, this summer, we were going to be having some professional musicians come, and I was going to be a TA working with them and other musicians to create music from glass. So it has an incredible capability of resonance. I actually have a background in performing and singing. I play percussion instruments and dabble in a few other instruments. So the way that we work in the hot shop is very dance and music oriented. We usually have loud music playing while we're working, but it's a kind of an orchestration that occurs. It has to happen on a timeline, which is like a score, and it has to be completed and finished and go into an oven, which is like recording a song. So there are some real similarities that bring the musical background of myself and others to the glassmaking arena.
So, how do you think you've influenced others with your glass work and your teaching and your overall energy?
Well, I wish we could pick up a few people who could answer that question because I'm sure there'd be some stories. But I was heavily influenced by a group of wild folks when I got into it in my 20s, and that just sort of spilled over in my techniques of teaching. We, as I said, have groups of people that get together at these sort of summer camps, and we're free to kind of do what we want. And so I push the boundaries, maybe the limits sometimes a little much. I think there's probably been a slew of rules created around some of the things that I've done. But inevitably, there's a lot of students who will come back to me and say, man, I can't believe that session that we did and all the crazy stuff that we did. And it's been years of building on games and activities and group dynamics that I do with the classes that I try to break down any of the sort of preconceptions that people bring when they come to a class. They come, they're nervous that they don't have the level of skill or what, and we try to just sort of flatten that idea and sort of even the playing field by including everyone in everything that we're doing. We try not to have any hierarchical approach to the material. I mean, certainly there's the gaffer who's sort of steering the team or orchestrating the class, but a good director will sort of bounce others' ideas off of each other and try to get people to work together. And then in the end, the takeaway is really all of the inspiration that I get from the energy that's 12-fold if there's 12 students. Or it's an amazing thing that's really become pretty addictive. These summer school outings, which are 2 or 3 weeks long.
So it sounds as if your approach is almost like theater or maybe even jazz.
It's like jazz. It's very much, I talk to them about improvisation because when you're making glass in the hot shop, everything can go wrong, and it tends to. And if you don't learn how to roll with that, those mistakes, right? And we use the term happy accidents a lot. Much of my work has been sort of looking at the things that are happening outside of what we're trying to do and seeing the accidents sort of teaching us about what else is possible, because, we sort of see how it's supposed to be done, and we of course want to learn that way. But then there's like so much more. And how do you find that? And so by approaching it in an improvisational way and setting up sort of the stage for it, and then allowing those accidents to be not, mistakes, then we discover things that we wouldn't normally find in sort of a regular exercise.
Well, I know that we all know that you have been a great influence on so many artists that you've worked with. And so, how important is it to you to be an influencer in your industry? And how can you find even further ways to spread this message?
It's a great question. Certainly now with the internet, and the way people are learning, they'll go to YouTube and learn how to make a Venetian goblet. So that's sort of made skill commonplace. And my sort of idea of getting people to look outside that box is always my first challenge, because I'm kind of tired of things that have already been made. I've learned to make them. It's important to build your skill set so that you can move on to with the material proficiently. But in terms of influencing people, there's nothing better than having somebody make something and them feel good about showing it to other people. And so with every class that I teach, we end the class with an exhibition. And this is true of Corning and Penland and in Europe and all the classes that I do. We start the class by announcing that you're going to be working on a piece or two or three for an exhibition. And all of a sudden that changes the format of the whole thing. And it creates a goal-oriented, exercise where people have to sort of go through the steps to do what is necessary to, say, show pieces in the professional world. And so that, a lot of times is a slap in the face. And it's a wake-up call. People tend to sort of hide behind their comfort zone. And so I feel like by sort of stripping down the normality of what we do and presenting an anarchy of sorts, then it creates an alternative path that people can discover something a little bit different about themselves, than what they brought to the class. And so they walk away feeling energized and inspired. And like with the class that we're going to be doing up there, Finding Your Way, it's difficult to find your way with any material. Sometimes it comes more naturally to some than others. But if I can help somebody get onto or make steps closer to their style, I feel like we've made some real accomplishments.
Let's take a look at some of the places that you've taught and some of the people that you've worked with.
I've been a lucky fella to be able to have my art and glass take me to many interesting and fascinating places where glass is made. And as I said, it's a group activity. It's a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a club, a cult, which is so much fun. And this is SOFA in Chicago. This is the Corning mobile unit, and doing some more performance-oriented glass making there. This is making the centerpiece designs at Pilchuck for their large auction. Doing some experimenting with some of the other techniques that I use. And a piece like this is made at another SOFA in the Ignite Studios in Chicago. This takes a week to put together and a team of 10 people. So it all relies on a group effort. This is in Turkey. which again, even though I don't speak that much Turkish, we tend to be able to speak through the material. So it's really a neat way to connect with people. This is Jason Christensen from the Chihuly team, and we're creating a large leaf vessel here in the gaffer station at Pilchuck. These things couldn't be done without the expertise of many of these artists. These are all professional artists or burgeoning artists. This is at the Duncan, the famed Duncan Mclellan Gallery for the Glass Society Conference last year. And as I said, a large team to put together a lot of sort of pre-made parts that we heated up for the Sea Dreamer, which is a Dreamer series. And then here just shows sort of a sped up version of what it looks like when we're putting together a piece. And you can see the kind of dance that's happening, right? And I'm sort of the orchestrator that's helping to build these pieces. And for those of you who don't know about making glass, it's extremely complex material to keep alive. That is to say that we bring it from the furnace into the studio. We work with fire. We have to keep it above a certain temperature. If any one part of it falls below that temperature, it cracks and the whole game is over and you kind of got to start over. So it's a delicate dance that requires high coordination and orchestration. There's a real team feeling that builds, and that's just built incredible relationships over the years.
Love that phrase, keeping the glass alive.
Yeah, like in this case, who wouldn't want a cowboy riding a bunny on a carrot rocket? But it's these kind of gatherings, and this is at the Pratt Institute in Seattle for a conference where we've just really put 3 artists together and collaborated on the spot. And that's the real beauty that keeps bringing you back to the studio and getting together with these people, is that it's sort of an anything goes approach to the material, which is a great way to live,
Well, that's pretty amazing. And you show all kinds of techniques. You show hot glass on the pipe, which we're pretty familiar with, but also mold blown. And do you use any cast glass also?
We do. I mean, really, there's nothing we won't use. What's I guess important to point out there is that I've spent my life traveling around the world, literally following the trends and learning about different techniques of glass. And so by having a very expansive knowledge of how glass is made and having worked with casters, I mean, I spent years working for John Lewis, who's a big caster in Oakland, this massive castings, and learning how to fabricate large pieces together. Of course, I'm drawn to the blowing because as a youngster, it's a bit of a sport that translates into some of the other sports like surfing and skating and rock climbing and things, that it's a very hand-eye coordinated sport. So having all those different disciplines under your belt, you can draw on any one of those techniques at any given point to facilitate the idea that you may have. And I might add, when I'm teaching people, we'll try to approach an idea or a project in several different ways, via casting or blowing or fusing or whatever it is. And it may be some combination of those things that ultimately arrives us at the techniques that will help develop a series for somebody. So I can't say enough about expanding sort of your knowledge of how the glass is made and how other people are using it. I mean, now with the social networking, every day I'm waking moment is looking on Instagram or Facebook or whatnot and seeing what people are doing and seeing what galleries are showing and what collectors are interested in, because it's a conversation, it's a dialogue that we're doing between creating and collecting.
Well, we love that your approach is so alive. And we're going to show a little clip about some of the work we just saw in the studio, and we'll please, Rob, talk about the different techniques that are used in those pieces, because there's so many different techniques here.
Sure. Well, it'll probably move pretty quickly, but I mentioned the leaf vessel. So these are cast and then built together hot on a pipe. Uh, these are large pieces. They're quite heavy. They require a coordinated team effort, and there's a high failure rate because they're put together in a very dainty way, so that there are spaces that move in between the pieces. I look at them as being almost like Indians had made them from leaves to carry water or something like this. You know, it's sort of like a vessel and nature, the leaf vessel. And then this sort of signature Windstar series is made from blowing into molds and then manipulating the glass once it's out of a mold, cooling the glass, and then fabricating the 13 pieces that make up this together. Here too, these pieces are made individually and then cold fused together to create this sort of phenomenal balance of them standing on these points. So for me, it's always a challenge to find some new way to construct the work. And then, of course, doing things with other materials to support the glass is expanding the, the capability for scale, and architecture is rather important. And here again, the cast leaves, which are manipulated hot in the hot shop, and to sort of lighting and more. You'll see quite a few of the Windstars. They tend to be a pretty popular series right now. And they're made in 6 different sizes up to 36 inches. So, and those can weigh almost 200 pounds. So it's challenging. And then I do a lot of architectural installation. This is a neat way of making things that are molded, blown, but then spreading them out so I can cover large areas. So we just finished with one 30-foot wall of pieces like this in a game room in a place here that has a fun game type kind of quality to it, almost like a pin the tail or a type of thing. And again, the Gathering series. But, these series are built over crunching the drawing book over years. And it's only about, it seems like every 5 years you sort of get struck by lightning with a series that sort of sticks. You figure out a technique of putting something together, and then you elaborate on that series. And so many of these series have been running for several years. And these are bubble strands, mirrored bubbles on cables. And we did, as you saw, a large chandelier out of these. And then we were doing some architectural installation with them in this case. And the bamboo, again, segmented pieces created by hand and then constructed together to create this sort of bamboo forest. And the Windstars are continuing to hold my attention for a while. The movement is different in every one. So every time you put one together, it's a little bit like a surprise, which is a nice, a nice way of working, because I never know what they're gonna look like in the end. And as I said, putting blown work together in construction is a pretty complex because it's somewhat fragile, and so building things that are structurally sound is always a challenge in learning how to do that. In this case, with the spurs, and again, the movement is intoxicating and a surprise. And this perch series is a rather new one that I'm visiting. We're doing some little bit larger scale ones now. And again, this is sort of that interplay between nature and my art, whereby I found these fronds, in the yard essentially here, and I'm kind of looking at them and thinking, hey, we could blow glass into them, and create these wall pieces. So in that case, just working directly with nature. And in this case, really referring to architecture, which, I'm surrounded by here on Miami Beach, where I live is a World Heritage Site for Art Deco. So it's influential.
Thank you, Rob. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to address to Rob specifically? I know Jason has, Jason Chakravarty's with us, and
Oh, hey, hey, Jason.
uh, he
Love
said,
your
oh, those
work.
videos make me miss the hot shop. And I'm sure that there are some other artists watching who feel that way as well.
Yeah, Jason, I'm right with you there, man. It's been a tough run, but we'll get back to it. And just remember that we're all still here, and the hot shops are there, and we'll be up and running and back together soon, I hope. I'm feeling it from everybody right now. Hopefully, you can find a place and some folks to work with soon.
Well, Lauren Hill, who is our DMG school project manager and director, and she says she can't wait to have your energy and skill back in the hot shop. And of course, we are having you back in October. So I don't know if you and Duncan would like to discuss a little bit what's going to happen in October for the gallery and the DMG school project.
Duncan?
Duncan's muted.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you come to a master class. And the fun that Rob brings to a class anyway. And some of our participants have been in our classes. They're made for people that generally haven't blown glass, haven't done glass before. So everybody is a newbie to it. And it's a really energizing weekend. You participate in what we do when we bring in artists like Rob, and the lectures and the events that we have in the evening. But it's 3 days of classes that you really walk out learning a great deal, making a wonderful piece or two. And more than anything, it's probably one of the most fun experiences you'll ever have. And we figured out a way to do it safely. So we look forward to you coming in October. We're going to have a ball. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
By the way,
go ahead.
I noticed in one of the, when you were at Pilchuck, you had Fred Call there.
Right.
When were you working with Fred?
That was last summer, and Fred and I have done some stuff together. He's got an incredible approach to the material and creating molds. And I did a class up there with him actually last summer where we were cutting CNC machines, cutting graphite to create casting molds, and then casting into them and building forms in the hot shop. So that's what you saw us doing there. And I would urge anyone to visit with Fred. He's all around and has also an incredible energy in teaching and coming to the shop. But I would like to add a little something. I'd first like to say that you've built an incredible facility and really a sort of a mecca for glass in the St. Pete area. And we were lucky enough to have the glass conference come there last year and have the Florida glass scene under the watch of our community, which was really exciting. And having, this community in Florida grow through events like what you're doing with these classes and showing in the gallery is greatly appreciated. So it's going to be a great pleasure. And certainly we're going to approach it with kid gloves for safety and make sure that everyone feels comfortable given the circumstances, but we're going to have a great time. And however it is that we expedite it, it's going to be fantastic. And so I am looking forward to it very much.
Thank you,
Rob.
Yeah.
We're also launching, Rob will help us launch a new program in North Pinellas County at the Creative Pinellas location. There'll be an exhibition of Rob's work and other glass artists as well, but Rob will be the premier artist opening that project. So that will be the third weekend of October. And it's a very exciting development, again, helping to bring and expand the knowledge of glass art throughout the West Coast and what is now known as the Glass Coast of Florida. So really excited to have you come down and launch that project, Rob. And let's see, um, someone else, Joni, and several people have asked, where can they get that beautiful T-shirt that you're wearing?
Well, I happen to have them for sale right here. Uh, if you want to visit me at my website, robsternartglass.com, we can communicate there, and I can certainly see that you get a hold of one. We have hats too. But yeah, it's a fun logo that plays on the idea of sport in the U.S., as it were, for glass. Hi, Lauren.
Yes.
Just saw you there. More questions, please.
Okay.
I would like to ask, how do you fuse the stars together?
Hi.
Hi.
How are you? I haven't seen you for a long time.
Well, since last November.
November.
I was in Biot last September. We could have met.
I just missed you.
Yes.
Well, to answer your question, I'm using some glass adhesives formulated for glass. And there's a considerable amount of cold working and fitting, right, to get the pieces to fit together. But it's been a long process of developing the sort of methodology of getting them to be archival. And we're building them where they're hanging and on walls and for lighting. And so every time we're building a new one, it's a new challenge. So we're developing new techniques with different adhesives, but largely it's a construction process.
Thanks, Natasha. We'd like to thank Rob again for spending this time, and all of you for spending this time with us again on Friday afternoon. Next Friday, we have Aya Oki, who was actually a resident artist at the DMG School Project. And Rob, you may have worked with Aya as well, but I know some of the other artists present have.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll be tuned into that for sure. She's fascinating, doing some fabulous work.
Thanks. And everyone be sure to pay attention and stay tuned for Rob's class and his visit to the gallery. And thank you for joining us. And Duncan, thank you for making this all possible.